In this video, I'm going to explain how you can memorize a lot of vocabulary quickly and improve your comprehension skills fast. Yeah? As I always say, memorizing a lot of vocabulary is really important, especially in the beginning. And later, massive input is super important as well. Lots of reading, lots of listening. Reading is going to be the best way to learn more vocabulary and also all the grammar without studying the rules. And obviously, listening is important if you want to end up understanding the language and speaking it well. But if you want to get there, first you need to learn vocabulary, because if you don't know the words, it doesn't matter how much you listen to the language, you won't understand anything. So the best approach is to memorize the most common words first, because if you take the 500 most common words in a language and you memorize them, you will understand around half, like 50% of a text. And if you memorize the 1,000 most common words, you'll understand 80% or so of a text. That doesn't mean this is not super precise. It's not always the same. It really depends on the text, but it's most of the time this is the way it is. These words, the most common ones, will allow you to understand most of it, and then you can learn the rest by seeing it in context, guessing what it means, and being exposed to it. You acquire the language. So, how do we memorize the first 500 to 1,000 words? Well, I've got this list here, and I'm using Portuguese as an example, but you could do this with any language. You simply have to take the list of words, paste it on DeepL or Google Translate. DeepL is better, in my opinion. Um, and yeah, and then paste it here next to them. So you've got the English on one side, Portuguese on the other. You could also do this with multiple languages. You can learn Portuguese in one column, then Spanish in another column, French, whatever, and you reuse it for every language that you want to learn. And you could do the same thing with the language islands, but that's a topic for another video. Basically, we've got the most common verbs here. Verbs are super important because verbs mean action, and you can't really understand a sentence without knowing the verbs. Nouns are also super important. Nouns, uh, one of the big mistakes in language learning is that they teach you a bunch of verbs and then all the grammar, how to conjugate those verbs, how to use them in the past, in the present, in the future, conditionals, blah, 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 blah. But you don't learn enough nouns. So you don't really know what you're talking about. You don't know the objects, you don't know. You need the nouns. Without the nouns, you don't get the context. It doesn't matter if you are able to put the verbs in the perfect conjugation. Nosotros habíamos hecho blah blah. No, it's just who cares. It's better to speak with mistakes in terms of grammar, but knowing the nouns so that you understand, and in context you can guess the tense. And if they are saying that they've done something and they really meant was that they had done something, is it that big of a difference? Not really. All that stuff, you learn it through input. You learn it by reading and listening. Let's focus on vocab, because you can start reading and listening straight away, but vocabulary, having memorized the most common vocabulary, will make the process much easier and faster, because you'll understand way more from the very beginning when you're reading and listening. So you'll be able to do more of it and more easily. So you will learn, yeah, more and faster. So the way you should do this is you get the verbs, adjectives also really important: big, slow, cheap, expensive, whatever. Verbs, adjectives, nouns. And then I've got a list of more advanced verbs, because there are, especially if you're reading, you will encounter lots and lots and lots of verbs that are less common but still useful. Uh, but you should learn the 100 most common ones first, and the others if you want to get good and be able to. If you want to read books, then you'll need these ones as well. If you just want to have conversations, this should be enough. But it doesn't mean that people won't use these other ones, the more complex ones. So you should eventually learn those as well. You can learn them in context by being exposed to them, or you can learn them, memorize them from the list. I always recommend a combination of memorizing lists, lots of input, memorizing lists, lots of input. Yeah, because the more memorizing you do, the easier the input will be. So we've got a long list of hundreds of nouns in this case. We have verbs, adjectives, yeah. And what you will immediately notice is that a lot of them look familiar. Yeah. Actor, actor, ad, anuncio, addition, design. This one looks weird. Okay, first one. Administração, vantagem, publicidade. Publicity, you can, like, aconselhamento, counseling, you can see the similarities. That's because they have a Latin root, all those words, or similar. Some of them could be Greek or whatever, but mostly Latin. And that means that they're easy to recognize. So you don't need to do this technique with them. What you should do is simply read the whole list, and then you look at the English word and try to say it in Portuguese. Look at it, see if you got it right. If not, you say it aloud. Do it with the next, with the next, and all of this. The ones with a similar root and they sound similar or familiar, you'll very easily memorize them just by reading it a few times and then seeing them in context. So no need to use the association technique. The association technique should be for words that are very different. If you're learning a language that's completely different from your native language, then you will need a lot more of there will be a lot more vocabulary that you need to do the association technique with, obviously, because Arabic or Russian or Chinese or Japanese they don't have these words. They don't sound similar. It's completely different. So everything needs to be associated and memorized. Not here. So what we'll do with the different ones is visualize and associate. So we'll create a mental image for this, for the meaning, and a mental image for the sound of the new word. So this is idade or idade, depends on European or Brazilian Portuguese, but the Brazilians tend to do the J thing here. But yeah, what does that sound like? What does that look like? The easiest thing is it just says dad in the middle, right? So dad, age, either think of your dad, what's your dad's age. You can make a mental image of that, or your dad aging, which nobody likes really to see, but yeah, you can you can associate age and your dad very easily, I guess, if you have that, I guess. Um, Again, easy. Again, similar quantity, similar. Now, you see, it's a lot of this stuff. Response, similar. Here, we find something that's different. But you can see all of this. Like out of 30 words, there are two or three that are different. They're completely different. So a lot of this stuff you can simply learn by reading. You see it in context, and the second or third time you see these words, it'll be very obvious to you. I mean, it'll be very obvious to you what they mean. So the association technique should be used for ones that are different, like really different, like this one. Manzana. If you know Spanish, you know manzana, so then it's already similar. But for those of you who only speak English, this is the thing. The more languages you learn, the easier this gets because you have a huge database of vocabulary from many different languages, and it will sound familiar to something. And also, when you're doing your associations, um, you will find words in a different language that, even if they're not related, they sound similar. So it's easier to make the associations and the visualizations. But in this case, okay, masa is apple, so you have to. This is pronounced like se, sa, masa. Uh, Sorry for my if there's any Brazilian or Portuguese person watching this. My pronunciation is not perfect, I know, but I can understand and speak it, so it's good enough, I guess. Um, you have to find something that sounds like this or that looks like this. And in this case, the very obvious one, can you guess it? Doesn't sound like it, but this looks like Mac. Yeah. So you can already make a mental Apple, computers, Mac, the Apple in the computer. Yeah. Otherwise, you should visualize something like mess, mass, something like that, something that sounds like this, and then you visualize it and you visualize an apple and you make some sort of story with it. The more weird it is, the more shocking it is, the easier it will be to remember. And when you do hundreds of these associations a day, it's inevitable that you'll end up forgetting some of them eventually. But if you're also listening to the language a lot and you're reading the language daily, you'll keep seeing the words in context and you will remember them, especially these ones, because these words are from a high frequency list. So you will keep seeing these words a lot if you read the language, if you listen to the language, which you should be doing all the time. Yeah, this one, ejército. This is army, ejército in Spanish, ejército in Portuguese. Very similar languages. You can, like, this sound looks like exercise, right? So you can make a mental image of, let's say, first thing that comes to my mind is like boot camp. You imagine the drill sergeant, they're doing like the like full metal jacket whole thing, like they're going like crawling in the mud on the barbed wire, and he's yelling at them and all that stuff, and they're doing like the jumping jacks and all that stuff, like in the army uniforms. You have to visualize the whole thing. The more details there are, the easier it will be to remember. Yeah. Um, and you should do this with, again, I'm now going really slowly because I'm explaining everything, but you can see that a lot of the words look very similar. So aunt, tia, that looks like tea. It sounds like tea. So if you've got an aunt, you you can visualize her drinking tea or her spilling tea, because drinking tea is very normal. Spilling tea, and like in a really, like, it crashes and all that stuff. It's much more visual. It's easier to remember. You keep doing that with the whole thing. Uh, Again, I saw hand Mao somewhere there. Mao is really easy. You can just imagine the Chinese dictator, like, chopping someone's hand or something, or his hand. Um, yeah. So you do the whole thing, associate each and every one of them, and there are hundreds of these here, but you can associate like 150 words a minute once you get good at this. And if most of the list is already similar, like here, you don't need to associate them. So out of the 1,000 words, maybe you have to associate a couple hundred. So you can do that in a day, and then you Obviously, if it's a difficult language that you're learning, you need a few days to associate the whole list, unless you dedicate the whole day to associate each and every one of them. But the next thing would be to start doing a lot of reading and listening. What I recommend is continuing to do this exercise with more vocab, like all the unknown words that you find when reading and listening, so that you keep learning context specific vocabulary. Yeah, you memorize. If you like reading about a specific subject, always read and listen to content you're interested in, and then memorize vocabulary, unknown vocabulary that you find there from that context. So you'll develop context, context, contextual fluency. You'll get good at understanding that context, that specific topic first, and then from there, once you're comfortable with that, your comprehension will expand to the rest of the language. But you should keep doing this exercise, memorizing vocabulary, some words every day. Usually, all the unknown words you found the previous day. Yeah, so you read a bunch, you listen a bunch, and you, if you're reading, you just like highlight them or something. The next day, you associate the highlighted ones from the previous day, and then you continue reading. And the next day, you associate. Like tomorrow, you'll associate the ones from today, and so on. And because you're reading about the same topic daily, you'll keep seeing those words, and even if they're not the most common words, you will remember them because you'll review them on topic and you will remember those as well. But for this, simply memorize the whole list using associations. Advanced verbs here. This is more complicated. There are some, yeah, difficult ones with example sentences. This the translator is not that good for some of these because if they're not conjugated, yeah, mergulhar, I've used that one in conversation before. To dive. But again, you do the same thing with all of them. If you're not sure, it looks weird, or it simply didn't translate it correctly. Like some of them, the translator just doesn't translate them for some reason. But then in the or they don't have a literal equivalent translation. But if you see the example sentence, you can get you can understand which word they use for that specific thing, so you can memorize that one. Yeah, you see, hit is bater, but then it's acertó. Yeah, that's like acertar is like hit on target. Okay, so you should also memorize this whole thing when you've got the time, and then periodically. This is for the first few weeks. Later, if you get in enough input, again, massive input, super important. But if you get in enough input, the common verbs, adjectives, and nouns, you will see them over and over again in context. No need to review the list. This is much less common, so maybe you need to review it a few times. But if you're reading a lot in the language, you'll keep seeing those words, so you will eventually learn all of them as well. This is all you should do to be able to understand a language well in a short amount of time. Memorize the 80-20 vocabulary, so the most common 1,000-ish words, and get massive amounts of input. I will share this list for you to use, and yeah, you simply have to, if you're not interested in Portuguese, you simply have to copy this stuff in DeepL or Google Translate and paste it here in the language that you want to learn and memorize them.